What have in common a walled city of the Caucasus, a pilot 7 times world champion, and a desperate team to win? The answer could change the 2025 World Cup. What if I told you that Ferrari has discovered something as unexpected as potentially explosive for Baku? The arrival of the 7-time world champion was sold as the movement that would change Ferrari's mentality. The signing was not only a technical, but also emotional and symbolic commitment. For the first time since the Schumacher era, the Scuderia had an absolute leader, someone with the necessary weight to drag the entire team towards a more ambitious vision. But even for a pilot of its size, adaptation to the Ferrari ecosystem was more complex than anticipated. Hamilton landed with the expectation of accelerating his integration in record time. He said it in several interviews. He trusted that his experience would quickly absorb the car's behavior. However, he soon realized that the SF25 was not an easy-to-read car. His traditional style, based on the softness of curve and the control of the rear axle, did not find an echo in a chassis that reacted unpredictably before the slightest aerodynamic adjustment. In Albert Park, Hamilton had to resort to techniques that he had not used since his days with McLaren. He even imitated Leclerc's braking style to stay competitive. But perhaps the most revealing was its sincerity. Instead of hiding his difficulties, Hamilton was direct. The process was going to take longer than expected. There were no shortcuts. Time, precise simulations, and complete reconfiguration of its relationship with the car were needed. That public recognition was not a sign of weakness, but a sign that it was fully committed to the cause. Ferrari knew that his car could not aspire to compete on all scenarios. But if I found a circuit where the aerodynamic, traction, and temperature characteristics coincided with its hidden strengths, then that path could be transformed into a weapon. And Baku had all the ingredients. The simulation started with Hamilton. It was not another test. It was a millimetrically prepared session with complete career scenarios, high and medium aerodynamic load settings, specific suspension adjustments, and thermal degradation programs of tires to analyze their behavior on stint long. From the first batch, the numbers began to surprise. The first fact that ignited the positive alarms was the stability of the car in braking. Unlike other tracks where the SF25 was nervous, unstable, here it was almost surgical. The modification in the upper anchor of the rear suspension triangle, a small technical correction tested in Mugello weeks before, had completely transformed the behavior of the rear axle. The car not only stopped more stable but maintained a cleaner and closer line in the transition to the apex of the curve. Hamilton soon noticed. In his private words with the team, he described him as a feeling of balance that he had not felt since 2019. A comment that unleashed the astonishment among the engineers, not only because of the magnitude of the comparison, but because it came from a pilot who had been skeptical about the potential of the car just 2 weeks ago. Leclerc, on the other hand, validated the finding. Although his style is more aggressive, with greater emphasis on the entrance of curve and lower maintenance phase, he also felt that the car was at its optimal point. Stability allowed anticipating braking, attacking pianos, and above all, better managing temperatures and tire housing, one of the critical points in circuits such as Baku where the heat accumulated in long lines can destroy a strategy if it is not controlled. But beyond the sensations, the truly shocking were the times. Under conditions comparable to the race, with fuel load similar to a Q3, Hamilton managed to mark times that would place it within the top 2 on the virtual grid of Baku. Half faster than Leclerc. 0.3 ahead of the estimated time that McLaren could reach in simulation. And with a level of tires lower than Red Bull in equivalent conditions. The surprise in Maranello was total. Vasseur, who had followed real-time simulations from an adjoining technical room, requested an immediate data review session. What he saw was an almost perfect convergence between the car design theory and the pilot's response on virtual track. And that almost never happens. In general, simulations are plagued by unpredictable variables, but this time, prediction and execution seemed to speak the same language. The SF25, a car whose development was practically frozen since the end of June, had shown in simulations a behavior that had not manifested on any real track until that time. The improvement did not come from new pieces, but from surgical work in internal configurations, mechanical adjustments, and simulation parameters. The modified rear suspension, far from being a greater update, was just a silent evolution. However, the accumulated effect on the general balance of the car had transformed it into something more competitive than expected. In a normal context, this would have justified a restart of development, a series of progressive updates aimed at strengthening that performance window. But Vasseur did not opt for that path. On the contrary, its decision was radical: to definitively close the evolution cycle of the SF-25 and redirect all the technical effort towards the 2026 project. That platform, according to internal sources, is already completed by 70%, with concepts that were born from the lessons learned in the current car, but that require an absolute concentration of human resources, simulations, and wind tunnel. So why keep betting on the SF-25 if it will no longer develop? Because Vasseur understood that the battle of 2025 would not be won with aerodynamic news, but with operational intelligence. The car could no longer evolve, but it could be optimized. And that optimization meant perfecting each configuration parameter with surgical precision. No more changes of concept. No more experimental pieces. Only millimeter perfection of the current package. The objective: identify all circuits where the characteristics of the SF-25 can coincide with the requirements of the layout. Azerbaijan, by his unique nature, was the first on the list. They would follow Monaco, Singapore, and possibly Las Vegas. For scenarios very different from the high-load classics or rapid curves where McLaren and Mercedes dominate. This strategy demanded an absolute concentration. From this point, Ferrari stopped operating as a team that aspires to win and began acting as one that has identified the exact moment he can do. It is a subtle but fundamental difference. The approach changed the reagent to the surgical. Each practical session is no longer only preparation, but a hidden potential extraction operation. When this strategy began to be executed in silence, the paddock soon react. McLaren, accustomed to leading with relative comfort from Australia, began to analyze Ferrari data in detail. Something did not square. Sector simulations showed that the SF-25 was between 2 and 4/10 faster in technical areas than the MCL-39, a car widely recognized for its balance and curve efficiency. Red Bull, meanwhile, could not help show discomfort. Max Verstappen requested an urgent technical review of RB21 after practices in China. Not for a specific failure, but because of the general sensation that Ferrari was about to sneak into a fight they thought they have controlled. Even Mercedes, who was growing progressively with George Russell and the young Antonelli, internally acknowledged that Baku's data were alarming. Not because Ferrari had taken a second out of nowhere, but because he had done it without developing anything new. What was previously attributed to the lack of evolution was now interpreted as pure optimization. And that, in a championship where the margins are minimal, is a much more dangerous threat. Vasseur, meanwhile, has not made great statements. His silence is strategic. He knows that media pressure can destabilize what has cost most to build in Ferrari, a stable technical environment. The internal message is clear. It is not about saving the year. It's about carefully choosing the battles that can be won. Because in a championship where the favorites are busy protecting their leadership, the true threat can come from below, when no one is waiting for her. Ferrari arrives with an internal conviction that he had not had in years. It's not about selling smoke or repeating corporate speeches. These are concrete data, real sensations behind the wheel, perfect correlations between simulation and track. Hamilton, in just 3 races, has ceased to be a media figure dressed in red to become a silent executor who understands what the car needs and, more importantly, when he must attack. Leclerc, which until now had taken the emotional weight of the team, has also responded. Not with words, but with consistency. And with sufficient maturity to accept that Hamilton's rhythm in simulation is a warning and an opportunity at the same time. But here it is not just pilots. This is timing, of strategic intelligence, and of something that cannot be quantified, but that all the great teams know when it appears. The exact moment where the opportunity and preparation cross. And that moment for Ferrari seems to be now. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix will not be a simple speed test. It will be a tempo test, tactical reading, of execution without margin of error. A circuit that requires surgical precision, tire management in extreme conditions, and steel nerves when the walls are centimeters from the car. If the simulations are confirmed, Ferrari has a window of a few laps, perhaps a couple of stints, to execute a perfect strategy. If you succeed, the championship narrative can turn on its own axis. And if it fails, there will be no second chance. But beyond the punctual result, what is at stake is the validation of a concept. Can a team stop evolving a car and still win at the right point of its maximum optimization? Can a pilot like Hamilton, accustomed to dominate with superior machinery, reconstruct from the base and lead a project with fair but perfectly refined weapons? And the biggest question of all is in the air. Is this the beginning of Ferrari's return, or just the mirage of another false hope in the middle of the desert? The answer will not arrive in an interview or a telemetry fact. It will arrive when the lights go out in Baku, when the chaos of the first curve dissipates, and when the stopwatch begins to reveal who has read better the story that is written in the asphalt.